Pride, I have learned, is a poison you willingly drink, savoring its fire even as it corrodes you from within. For the longest time, I mistook that burning for strength. My name is Alistair Beaumont, Earl of Blackwood, or at least, that is the title that, at the age of 29, I felt defined the very essence of my soul. In the glittering ballrooms of 1785 London, a title like mine was a shield and a sword. It granted me access to any circle, excused my sharpest remarks as mere wit, and insulated me from the dreary realities of the common man. I was admired, I was envied, and I was insufferably arrogant. I believed my intellect and my station placed me above consequence. It was a spectacular miscalculation. The architect of my downfall was, of course, a man whose boots I was not fit to polish, at least according to the king himself. The Duke of Crampton, a man of immense wealth and political power, yet possessing all the charisma of a damp fog. We were at a soiree hosted by a viscount, the air thick with perfume and powdered wigs. The Duke was holding court, pontificating on military strategy regarding the lingering tensions with the French. It was a subject about which he knew laughably little, and I, having had perhaps one glass of brandy too many, felt compelled to enlighten the crowd. When he paused for a dramatic breath, I stepped forward. "Your Grace," I began, my voice carrying across the hushed room. "Your grasp of battlefield tactics is truly astonishing. One might almost believe you've read a book on the subject." A few nervous titters rippled through the audience. The Duke's face, a fleshy canvas of self-importance, tightened. He looked at me, a smirk on his lips, and said, "Lord Blackwood, your wit is as well known as your lack of active military service." He thought it a fine retort. He was wrong. I smiled, a slow, predatory curving of the lips that I had perfected over years. "Indeed, Your Grace, I find I am far more effective dismantling my opponents with a single sentence than you are with an entire fleet. It is a matter of efficiency, you see, something you, with your shipping investments, ought to appreciate." The room fell silent. I had not merely insulted him. I had questioned his competence and his business acumen in front of his peers. It was a direct hit, and it was a fatal error. The Duke did not get angry. He simply nodded, a chillingly calm gesture, and turned away. In that moment, I knew I had made a powerful enemy. I did not have to wait long for the repercussions. 2 days later, I was summoned by one of the king's senior advisors, a man named Sir Walter Finch. He received me not in a grand office, but in a small, sterile antechamber. "Lord Blackwood," he said, without any preamble, "the king is displeased with the current lack of decorum among the peerage. Your recent public exchange with the Duke of Crampton has been noted as a particularly egregious example. I prepared to offer a token apology, perhaps accept a temporary, informal exile from court." But Sir Walter's next word struck me like a physical blow. His Majesty, at the Duke's suggestion, has decided that a period of quiet contemplation would be beneficial for you. You will retire to your country estate, Blackwood Manor, for the winter season. Exile, humiliating, but survivable. I nodded stiffly. "I understand." "Ah, but that is not all," Sir Walter continued, a faint glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "To ensure your time is spent in charitable reflection, you will be hosting a guest. The Duchess of Crampton's younger sister, Miss Eleanor Vance. The girl is of a delicate constitution, you see. The country air is thought to be just the thing for her. The Duchess is entrusting you with her care." The room seemed to tilt. This was not just exile. It was a punishment of exquisite cruelty, tailored specifically for me. I, who valued strength, beauty, and perfection, was to be a glorified nursemaid to some sickly, provincial woman. It was an insult of the highest order, a public emasculation disguised as a royal decree. My estate was to become a sanatorium. My winter, a prison of another's making. I could not refuse. To defy the order would be to defy the king. My jaw was so tight, I thought it might crack. "When does she arrive?" I managed to ask, my voice a strained whisper. "On Friday," Sir Walter said, rising. "Do try to be a gracious host, my lord. It is the least you can do." The 3 days leading up to her arrival were a torment of impotent fury. I paced the halls of my London townhome, smashing a vase here, kicking a chair there. My staff tiptoed around me, their eyes wide with fear. Blackwood Manor, my ancestral home, was a place of pride for me. Now, it was to be the site of my humiliation. I traveled there the day before her scheduled arrival, the cold November rain lashing against my carriage, mirroring the storm inside my soul. The manor was as imposing as ever, its gray stones seeming to absorb the bleak light of the winter sky. I gave my head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, her instructions. "A Miss Vance is arriving tomorrow," I told her, my tone clipped and cold. "She is the sister of the Duchess of Crampton. She is unwell. You will see to it that the East Wing is prepared for her. She is to have anything she requires, but she is to be kept separate. I do not wish to be disturbed." Mrs. Gable, a woman who had served my family for 40 years, simply nodded. "Very good, my lord. And will you be greeting her upon her arrival?" "No," I snapped. "You will. I will be in my library." And so, the next afternoon, I watched from behind the heavy velvet curtains of my library as her carriage, modest and spattered with mud, rolled up the gravel drive. A footman opened the door. I expected to see a figure swathed in blankets, perhaps even carried from the carriage. Instead, a young woman emerged under her own power, though she moved with a pronounced limp. Even from a distance, I could see she was pale, her dark hair pulled back severely, making her face seem small and stark in the gray afternoon. She did not look up at the grand facade of the house, but kept her eyes fixed on the ground as she made her slow, careful way to the entrance, a single maid trailing behind her. This was my punishment. This frail, limping ghost sent to haunt my home and my pride. I let the curtain fall, turned on my heel, and poured myself a large glass of whiskey. The first week was an exercise in mutual avoidance. I remained in my library and my fencing salon. She, I was told by Mrs. Gable, remained in her rooms. I was informed that she took her meals in her suite and spent her days reading or sitting by the window. I felt a grim satisfaction in this. The less I saw of her, the better. My days were long and empty, filled with a simmering resentment that had no outlet. I would read a book, only to find myself staring at the same page for an hour, my mind replaying my humiliation in London. The silence of the great house felt different now. It was not the peaceful silence of solitude, but the heavy, oppressive silence of a prison. I stood there one evening, the cold of the window pane seeping into my palm as I watched the snow begin to fall, feeling utterly and completely alone in my own home. I wonder if any of you watching have ever felt trapped by your own circumstances, cornered by a mistake that you can't undo. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from today as I share this story of my gilded cage. My punishment had a name, and it was Eleanor Vance, and I had not even properly spoken a single word to her. I intended to keep it that way for as long as I possibly could. And so the days bled into one another, each one a perfect copy of the last, a silent, gray, and utterly unbearable testament to my fall from grace. Another 2 weeks passed in that silent, suffocating limbo. The snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the world in a pristine, uniform white that felt more like a shroud than a blanket. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my library, the rhythmic clash of steel in my fencing practice, and the bottom of glass. The fury had cooled into a dull, gnawing boredom, which was somehow worse. It was an emptiness that gnawed at the edges of my sanity. It was this profound sense of ennui, of utter pointlessness, that finally drove me from my wing of the house. I needed a walk, to feel the strain of muscles, to see something different, even if it was just a different pattern of dust on the furniture. I found myself in a long, cold corridor I rarely used, one that led to the estate's winter garden. It was a folly built by my grandfather, a massive conservatory of iron and glass that had once housed an impressive collection of exotic flora. I hadn't set foot in it for years. I assumed it was now a skeletal graveyard of frozen pots and dead leaves, a fitting monument to my current state of mind. Pushing open the heavy oak door, I was met with a wave of surprisingly cool, damp air that smelled of earth and frost. The place was just as I'd imagined, and yet not. It was a cathedral of neglect. A fine layer of dust coated the glass panes, diffusing the weak winter light into a hazy, ethereal glow. The skeletal remains of ferns and palms drooped from their massive urns. It was a place of ghosts, a testament to forgotten beauty. I walked down the central aisle, my boots echoing on the stone floor, feeling a strange kinship with the decay around me. And then I saw it, a single spot of color in the vast expanse of gray and brown. And, standing before it, was her, Miss Eleanor Vance. She was at the far end of the conservatory, her back mostly to me. She was not sitting idly. She was standing, leaning over a large stone planter, her posture one of intense concentration. In that planter, surrounded by frozen, barren earth, grew a single rose bush. And on that bush, defying the season, was one perfect, cream-colored rose, its petals tightly furled against the cold. She was tending to it, a small pair of shears in one gloved hand, her touch impossibly gentle as she snipped away a withered leaf. I stood there for a long moment, simply watching. This was not the frail, listless creature I had imagined hiding in her rooms. The woman before me had purpose. There was a quiet strength in the set of her shoulders, a focused grace in her movements that her limp, which was barely noticeable as she shifted her weight, did not diminish in the slightest. Curiosity, a feeling I had not experienced in a very long time, began to stir. I found myself walking toward her, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet space. She heard me and turned. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of gray, widened for a fraction of a second in surprise. There was no fear in them, only a calm, questioning neutrality. I felt a sudden, inexplicable need to justify my presence in my own home. Miss Vance, I said, my voice sounding stiff and formal. I was unaware you had an interest in botany. I expected a timid, mumbled reply. I was not prepared for the small, almost imperceptible smile that touched her lips. She looked from me to the rose and then back again. And I was unaware, my lord, she replied, her voice soft but clear as a bell, that you had an interest in anything beyond your library's decanter. The words struck me with the force of a physical slap. They were not delivered with malice, but with a simple, devastating directness. It was the truth, and she had spoken it without hesitation. I was so taken aback that, for a moment, I could not think of a single witty retort. The shield of my arrogance had been pierced by this quiet, limping girl. I found myself gesturing lamely at the flower. A rose, I stated intelligently. In the middle of winter. It seems improbable. It is a Christmas rose, she explained, turning her attention back to the plant. Helleborus niger. It is not a true rose, of course. It thrives in the cold. It blooms when everything else has the good sense to be dormant. Her fingers brushed a petal with a reverence I had never seen anyone give to anything. I found it here when I arrived, choked by weeds. It only needed a little care to breathe again. We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint whisper of the wind against the glass roof. I was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. I saw past the reputation, past the limp and the paleness her sister so cruelly emphasized. I saw the sharp intelligence in her gray eyes, the resilience in the set of her jaw. The faint, silvery scar near her temple that I had heard whispers about was barely visible, like a crack in fine porcelain, a mark of survival, not of damage. And you? I asked, the question coming out before I could stop it. Do you thrive in the cold, Miss Vance? She finally looked at me fully, and her gaze was unwavering. One learns to, my lord, or one perishes. There was no self-pity in her tone. It was a statement of fact, as simple and profound as the existence of the winter rose itself. I, who had been wallowing in my self-inflicted misery for weeks, felt a hot flush of shame. My punishment was a temporary inconvenience. Hers, I was beginning to suspect, had been a lifetime. I realized I had been monstrously cruel in my neglect of her. I have been a poor host, Miss Vance, I said, the apology feeling inadequate as soon as it left my lips. She offered a slight shrug, a gesture of quiet grace. You were commanded to host me, Lord Blackwood. You were not commanded to enjoy it. Her honesty was a relentless, refreshing force. It cleared the stale air of my self-pity. Perhaps, I said, a genuine smile forming on my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. But my enjoyment, or lack thereof, should not dictate my manners. I gestured to the vast, dead conservatory around us. My grandfather adored this place. I confess I have let it fall to ruin. It is not ruined, she said softly, looking around. It is only sleeping. We spoke for nearly an hour. She told me about the different plants that had once grown there, her knowledge gleaned from old gardening ledgers she had found in the Manor's library. I, in turn, found myself telling her of my grandfather, of his passion for building and growing things. The conversation flowed easily, naturally. It was an exchange between two minds, unburdened by rank or reputation. All my life, I had sought out the company of the brilliant, the beautiful, the witty. Yet, in this cold, forgotten place, I had found a quality of conversation that eclipsed any I had ever known in the salons of London. It was real. When I finally took my leave, promising to have the gardeners bring in fresh soil and supplies, the winter sun was setting, casting long, golden rays through the dusty glass. As I walked back through the silent corridors of the manor, the house felt different. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of her voice, the memory of her quiet strength. My punishment had a name, Eleanor Vance. But for the first time, her name did not sound like a sentence. It sounded like a question, one I desperately wanted to know the answer to. For the first time since my fall from grace, I did not feel like a prisoner. I felt like a discoverer, and I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that I had to go back to that winter garden. I had to go back. The very next morning, I bypassed my library entirely and walked directly to the winter garden. I found her there again, a book resting in her lap. She looked up as I approached, and this time, the small smile that graced her lips was one of welcome. I had brought with me a volume of poetry, one I had cherished for its sharp, cynical wit. I began to read a passage aloud, and when I was finished, she offered a critique so insightful and elegantly phrased that it laid bare a layer of meaning I had never considered. That was the beginning. The winter garden became our sanctuary, a world unto itself. Every day, I would find a new reason to go there. I brought her books from my library, and we would spend hours debating the merits of Swift's satire or the emotional landscapes of Richardson's novels. I spoke of my travels, of the art in Florence and the music in Vienna, and she, who had never been more than 50 miles from her family home, would counter with observations gleaned from books that showed a depth of understanding that humbled me. She had traveled further in her mind than I had with all my privilege. Her intellect was a thing of rare and brilliant beauty, a diamond that had been hidden away in the dark. I began to see her, truly see all of her. Her limp, which I had once registered with cold pity, became just a part of her rhythm, a cadence to her walk that was uniquely hers. Her scar, once a symbol of her supposed fragility, became a mark of distinction, a silver thread that caught the light when she turned her head just so. I was no longer hosting my punishment. I was courting a mind, a soul, that made every glittering society hostess I had ever known seem like a pale, hollow imitation. The days, which had once been an agony of boredom, were now not long enough. The change in me did not go unnoticed. My valet remarked that my mood had lightened. My orders to the kitchen staff became more thoughtful. And Mrs. Gable, my steadfast housekeeper, would watch me head towards the conservatory each morning with an expression of quiet, knowing approval in her eyes. I knew the staff was whispering, but for the first time in my life, I found that I did not care about the opinions of others. My world had contracted to this single estate, to a single glass house, to a single person, and yet it had never felt so vast. One evening, I found myself unwilling to let our conversation end with the setting sun. On impulse, I stopped Mrs. Gable in the main hall. "Tonight," I said, trying to sound casual, "dinner will not be served in the main dining hall. Please have a small table prepared for two in the west study. And inform Miss Vance that I request the pleasure of her company." Mrs. Gable's professional veneer cracked for just a second, a small, genuine smile breaking through. "At once, my lord," she said. That dinner was a revelation. Away from our cold sanctuary, warmed by a roaring fire, a different kind of intimacy bloomed. We spoke not of books or philosophy, but of our lives. She spoke of her childhood, of a brief, happy time before the riding accident that had changed everything. She spoke of her sister, the Duchess, not with bitterness, but with a sad, weary understanding of the ambition that drove her. And I, in turn, spoke of the crushing weight of my own title, of the expectation to be a certain kind of man, a persona I had perfected and come to despise. It was a confession, and she received it with a grace and empathy that made me feel, for the first time, truly understood. My feelings for her had deepened into something far more potent than admiration. It was a fierce, protective love, and I was overcome by a desire to give her something more, a piece of the world that had been stolen from her. The next evening, after our dinner, I found her in the drawing room. The sky outside was a perfect, clear black, studded with a billion stars. "Miss Vance," I began, my heart beating like a drum. "The stars are exceptionally bright tonight. I was wondering if you would permit me to show you." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "Show me?" "Yes. My finest carriage is ready. It is filled with furs. We will not go far. Just at the top of the hill, where the sky opens up." Her eyes widened. I saw a flicker of fear in them, the ingrained caution of someone who had been taught that the world was a dangerous place for her. But behind it I saw a spark of longing. "My sister," she began. "Your sister is in London," I said gently but firmly. "Tonight you are my guest, and I wish for you to see the stars." She hesitated for only a heartbeat longer before giving me a slow, radiant nod. The joy on her face as we rode through the crisp, cold night was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. We stopped at the crest of the hill, and the footman opened the door. The air was frigid, but the sky was a breathtaking spectacle of celestial fire. Eleanor leaned forward, her face upturned, a look of pure, unadulterated wonder in her eyes. She had been confined to houses and gardens for so long, a prisoner of her sister's shame. This simple act of freedom was, for her, a miracle. She looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and whispered, "Thank you, Alistair." It was the first time she had used my given name. And in that moment, looking at her, I knew my old life was not just changing, it was over. It was a hollow shell I had no desire to return to. My future was here, with her. In that moment, I knew my life was changing irrevocably. If you believe that one person can change your world, and you want to see how our story unfolds, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Our return to the manor was quiet, filled with a new and profound sense of connection. The next few days were the happiest of my life. We were no longer hiding in the winter garden. We were simply together, sharing our days in a comfortable, domestic bliss I had never imagined possible. The bubble, however, was destined to burst. It happened on a Tuesday. I was in my study when Mrs. Gable knocked and entered, her face etched with concern. "My lord," she said, her voice low, "a letter arrived from Miss Vance this morning. It bears the Duchess of Crampton's seal." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "And she read it in the breakfast room, my lord." She went quite pale. She said nothing, but she retired to her room immediately and has not emerged since. I stood up, the book I was holding falling to the floor with a heavy thud. I went to her room and knocked softly on the door. There was no answer. I knocked again, more firmly this time. "Eleanor," I called out, my voice strained. "It's Alistair. Please let me in." After a long moment, I heard the lock click. She opened the door, just enough to look at me. The vibrant life that had animated her face for the past weeks was gone, replaced by a familiar, haunted pallor. Her eyes were filled with a dreadful resignation. In her hand, she clutched the letter. The warmth of the previous nights turned to ice in my veins. The storm we had forgotten, the one that had brought her here in the first place, was finally about to break over Blackwood Manor. She let me into her room, a space that had become a sanctuary of books and sketches, but now felt like a tomb. She didn't speak, but simply handed me the letter. The Duchess's handwriting was an elegant, precise script, each loop and stroke perfectly formed, and each word a perfectly aimed barb. I read the sentences that mattered most, my fury growing with each one. Asterisk, it has come to my attention that your convalescence has encouraged an inappropriate attachment. You must remember your position, Eleanor, and the delicate nature of your health, which makes you susceptible to such dangerous fantasies. I have made arrangements. I will be arriving shortly to escort you to a place more suited to your long-term care, the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy Convent in Northumbria. It is for the best. Asterisk for the best. A life sentence of cold stone, forced prayer, and absolute isolation, sold as a kindness. Eleanor had sunk onto the edge of her bed, her hands clasped in her lap, her spine bowed in defeat. It was a posture I recognized from that first day, and the sight of it sent a spear of ice through my heart. "She cannot do this," I said, the words a low growl. "She can," Eleanor whispered, her voice hollow. She is a duchess. I am nothing. A burden. This is what she has always done, Alistair. Whenever I find a small piece of happiness, she takes it away, to keep me safe, to keep her own world perfect. She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with a sorrow so deep it threatened to drown me. The time you have given me, it has been the kindest season of my life. I will be grateful for it always. But it is over. Before I could argue, before I could tell her that I would never let that happen, the sound of a carriage arriving on the gravel drive cut through the air. It was not the gentle rumble of a simple coach. It was the heavy, commanding sound of authority. We looked at each other. The Duchess had arrived. She had not even waited for a reply. I met her in the Great Hall. Isabella Vance, the Duchess of Crampton, was the pinnacle of London society, a woman sculpted from marble and ice. Her gown was a masterpiece of French silk, her hair a powdered mountain of perfect curls, her expression one of utter, unshakable composure. She regarded me not as an earl or as her host, but as a disobedient servant. 2 footmen stood behind her like statues. Lord Blackwood, she said, her voice smooth and cold. I have come to collect my sister. I trust she has not been an excessive burden. Your sister has been a delight, your grace, I replied, my own voice tight with a rage I was struggling to contain. Though I confess I am confused by your sudden concern. This convent, it seems a rather extreme prescription for a woman who has been thriving here. The Duchess's eyes narrowed. Her health is a complex matter, my lord. She is prone to flights of fancy, to forming unhealthy attachments when her routine is disturbed. You have been kind to her, I am sure, but you have indulged her fantasies. It was a mistake, one that I am here to rectify. Just then, Eleanor appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her maid beside her carrying a small travel case. She descended slowly, each step an act of submission. The Duchess did not look at her with an ounce of familial warmth. She watched her sister's limping gait with a flicker of annoyance, as if it were a personal affront. When Eleanor reached the bottom, the Duchess addressed her as if she were a child. Eleanor, we are leaving. Your things will follow. She then turned back to me. Thank you for your service, Lord Blackwood. The king will be informed that you have fulfilled your duty. Your rustication will soon be at an end. She saw it as a bribe. She believed that the promise of my old life would be enough to make me stand aside and watch as she dragged her sister away to a living death. The old me, the arrogant fool who had insulted her husband, would have taken the deal in a heartbeat. But that man was gone, burned away in the quiet light of a winter garden. No, I said. The word hung in the air, small but unyielding. The Duchess raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I beg your pardon. I said no. I repeated, stepping forward to stand beside Eleanor. I looked at Eleanor, at her pale, resigned face, and then at her sister's cold, beautiful mask. You will not be taking her anywhere. Do not be absurd, the Duchess hissed, her composure finally cracking. This is a family matter. It does not concern you. Eleanor flinched beside me, but I put a hand gently on her arm. It ceased to be a mere family matter when you stopped treating her as family, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. The staff, Mrs. Gable, my valet, several footmen and maids, had gathered at the edges of the hall, drawn by the confrontation. I was vaguely aware of them, of their wide, shocked eyes. I was making a scene, a spectacle, and I did not care. She is not a broken plaything to be stored in an attic because she no longer pleases you. She is not an embarrassment to be hidden away. I turned to face the Duchess fully, my voice rising. She is the strongest, most intelligent, most resilient woman I have ever had the honor of knowing. And she is the future Countess of Blackwood. A collective gasp went through the room. The Duchess's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. Eleanor stared at me, her lips parted in disbelief. I wasn't done. I took Eleanor's hand in mine, holding it firmly. You see the scar? I said, my voice ringing with passion. I gestured toward her temple. You see her limp? You see these things as flaws, as marks of shame. I see them as medals. They are proof of a battle she has fought every day of her life against the cruelty of her own blood and the ignorance of a society that you represent. A battle that she has won with grace and with a spirit you could not hope to comprehend. I finally looked at Eleanor, truly looked at her, ignoring everyone else in the room. They sent me here as a punishment, but they were wrong. It was my salvation. You were my salvation. You did not need curing, Eleanor. I did. My voice softened, becoming for her ears only. I love you. I love you for your mind, for your strength, for the quiet courage that blooms in you like a rose in winter. Then, I dropped to one knee, there on the cold marble of the great hall, in front of her tyrannical sister and my entire household. I held her hand to my lips. Eleanor Vance, will you do me the profound honor of becoming my wife? Tears were streaming down her face now, but they were not tears of sorrow. A watery, brilliant smile broke through, a dawn of such beauty, it took my breath away. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Alistair. Yes. I rose and stood beside her, facing the Duchess as a united front. The Duchess stared at us, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, utterly speechless for the first time in her life. She had lost. Her power was broken. In the ringing silence that followed, I held Eleanor's hand, her fingers trembling in mine, and for the first time, I felt the true weight and power of my title, not as a shield for my own vanity, but as a shelter for the woman I loved. The Duchess of Crampton stood frozen for a moment, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The mask cracked, revealing the ugly vanity beneath. "You will regret this, Blackwood," she spat, her voice a venomous whisper. "I will see you ruined. You will be a laughingstock from London to Bath. To throw away your name for this damaged creature." I did not flinch. I felt Eleanor's hand tighten in mine, and I squeezed it reassuringly. "You cannot take anything from me that I value, Your Grace," I said, my voice calm and steady. "And you will refer to the future Countess of Blackwood with respect." I held her gaze, and in my eyes, she saw not the arrogant boy she had sought to punish, but a man she could not break. Her power, built on intimidation and social terror, was useless against someone who simply refused to fear her. She turned on her heel, her silk gown hissing across the marble, and swept out of the great hall without another word, her footmen scrambling after her. The great oak doors closed behind her, and the silence she left in her wake was not heavy, but light. It was the silence of freedom. Then the world rushed back in. Eleanor turned to me, her face a beautiful, tear-stained canvas of disbelief and dawning joy. "Alistair," she breathed, as if unsure the moment was real. I smiled, reaching up to gently wipe a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "I believe you have given me my answer, Miss Vance," I said softly. "But I feel compelled to ask again, properly, when I'm not on my knees in a moment of high drama." A laugh, bright and clear as a bell, escaped her lips. "Yes," she said again, more firmly this time. "My answer will always be yes." At that, a smattering of applause broke out. We turned to see Mrs. Gable and the rest of the staff, beaming at us. My housekeeper's eyes were wet with tears. "Congratulations, my lord." "My lady," she said, her voice thick with genuine emotion. In that moment, surrounded not by the peerage of England, but by the honest affection of my household, I felt richer than I ever had in the gilded cages of London. The winter that followed was the warmest of my life. The world outside remained cold and white, but inside Blackwood Manor, a new life was taking root. We were married 3 weeks later, not in a grand cathedral in London, but in the small, stone parish church in the village, with the winter sun streaming through the stained glass windows. Our only guests were my loyal staff and the local tenants, their faces filled with a warmth that no amount of noble blood could replicate. And as the snows finally melted, giving way to the green shoots of April, a new season began, not just for the land, but for us. Spring came to Blackwood Manor and transformed it. Nowhere was this more evident than in the winter garden. It was no longer a monument to neglect. Under Eleanor's loving command, it had become a paradise. The glass panes were polished and gleaming, the stone floors swept clean. The dead plants had been replaced with vibrant life, a riot of color and fragrance. It was our favorite place, a living symbol of our story. Life with Eleanor was a constant, quiet joy. My love for her, which had been born in a moment of defiance, settled into a deep and abiding partnership. We were equals in every sense. I would spend my mornings with my estate manager, learning the business of my own lands, something I had neglected for years. She would spend hers in the garden or her study, but we always came together for lunch, eager to share the details of our day. I learned that her limp was more pronounced when she was tired, and I learned to lead her to a chair and sit with her, reading aloud as she rested. She, in turn, learned to recognize the furrow in my brow that meant I was wrestling with a difficult decision, and she would listen with an attentiveness and offer insights that invariably clarified my mind. We did not hear from the Duchess directly, but I did receive a short, terse letter from the Duke of Crampton. It was not an apology, but it was a surrender. He wrote that his wife was unwell and would be traveling abroad for her health. I understood the meaning perfectly. The scandal of her public defeat was more damaging to him than my marriage to her sister. We were to be left alone. Some of my old acquaintances in London did shun me, their invitations ceasing. I found, to my astonishment, that I did not care. Their world seemed distant and trivial now, a stage play with bad actors. My world, the real world, was here at Blackwood with my wife. One perfect afternoon in late May, I found Eleanor in the conservatory, which we now simply call the garden room. She was standing in the very spot where I had first found her, but now, instead of one defiant rose, she was surrounded by dozens of them, their petals of cream, pink, and crimson unfurling in the warm air. She was no longer pale. The country sun had brought a healthy color to her cheeks. She moved with a confidence that was breathtaking. She smiled as I approached and took my hand. I looked at her, my heart filled with a love so profound it almost hurt. I thought back to the man I had been, arrogant, cynical, and blind, living in a prison of my own making. My punishment had been to host the ailing sister of the Duchess. But it was I who was ailing. My soul was sick with pride. My heart was crippled by prejudice. Eleanor, with her quiet strength and unwavering spirit, had been the cure. She taught me that true strength isn't the absence of scars, but the courage to wear them with grace. She showed me that a person's worth is not measured by their social standing or the perfection of their form, but by the depth of their heart and the brilliance of their mind. True beauty is not found in flawless surfaces or the loud approval of the crowd. It is something much quieter, much stronger, It is the strength it takes to survive the winter and bloom anyway, against all odds. It is the courage to see beyond the visible, to find the light in a person that the rest of the world has overlooked. Eleanor was my light, and my life began the day I finally learned to see her. She taught me to see the world not as it appears, but as it could be, filled with hidden beauty. For more stories that uncover the strength of the human heart, please subscribe to our channel.